wanted to
Yeah.
ask you actually, mostly I want to ask you about the memoirs, but just before I do, have you cooked on an Aga? Do you cook on Aga? Do you have them? Do
I
you know them?
I have never cooked on an aga. I have a very good friend in Connemara who lives full time in Connemara, and she has one of those like 70-inch wide agas that I mean you could live in it. It's
Yeah.
it's massive. And I came very close to cooking on that, but I haven't. And I know enough about them to know how dicey they can be and how that it's like a whole learning curve.
Yeah.
But it seems to make a lot of sense. I mean, I'm living with a 22-year-old Viking range here. The door is now not closing the whole way because American things fall apart really. The built-in obsolescence. Um,
Yeah.
where like India Night has an aga that's from 1942, and
Yeah.
and still fine. And we talk about it all the time. I mean, I think that if we put one in, and we can get them here, but if we put one in here, it would fall straight through to the basement.
Would.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I grew up with Argos. I've only ever known Argos. The original Arga that we had
Mhm,
in my, well, it was my dad's cottage where we would come at the weekends, was wood burning. So I went from
mhm.
a wood burning Arga right through to oil, which we have now. And I've had various people in my life over the years saying, "Oh, it's totally unenvironmental, and you've got to get a whatever, whatever." But I mean, yeah, it's oil, and I would rather I could get some sort of like a vegetable oil to run it on, and one of these days
Yeah.
I will. But the truth is, my Arga was built in the 1960s.
Mhm,
It has broken down maybe once, and that was
mhm,
probably because somebody blocked the lungs. It's
mhm.
serviced twice a year. It's got almost no moving parts. Like if you want to turn the heat down on an Arga, you're lifting one of the lids. You just put a
Mhm.
coin on the Arga under the pot. That's how you turn
I
it down.
love that.
And
See, that
like
to me is brilliant.
brilliant. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't get it wrong. And all Arga owners have burns. I mean, you probably actually own, but yeah, have
I
burns.
I've heard that. Yeah, yeah. I've heard that, and I get the whole environmental thing. I mean, I completely understand that. We have a whole we have a whole population of people here who are moving to induction cooking,
Yep.
but which makes a lot of sense. You also have to buy all new pots and pans
Right.
if you're working with something like Creuset or other cast iron, and so there's that. But I can't help but think though that in terms of longevity and something not I mean I spend about 350 pounds a year servicing my Viking. Because
Yep.
the thermostat breaks usually right around Christmas,
Yep.
which is really nice. Like as people are coming in the door, it's nice.
Yeah.
And we talk about moving to Maine all the time. I mean, we've been thinking about it for a long time, and I do know people up there who have them and they use them for house heating and
Well, it heats my house as well, and you can
yeah,
have it heat your water. Yeah, and there is no built-in obsolescence. So that's the thing. It's like that's always
yeah.
been my rest days. And also, the other thing about Argos, and what I wanted to say was, if you and Susan ever come to the UK and you want a farmhouse to be in, just go and use mine and use the Arga, yours, because you will love it. Because the other thing is that my children, everyone gravitates towards it, and when I'm there, I lean against it. It is, even though it's not sitting in the heart of the house, it is the heart of the house, and that's the thing. I think those who haven't grown up with Argos, who just see it as a guzzling oil,
Mm,
like
yeah,
dinosaur, don't
yeah,
understand that aspect. So I've had to fight for my Arga, but I've landed in that place, yeah, where I'm not. There's no landfill. I'm not
yeah.
making. Angela any
You're
bigger.
not, yeah, yeah. And that makes perfect sense. I think that makes perfect sense. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to dive into memoir. I'll just say hello, everyone who's joined. I am with Alyssa Altman, and I have been in Altman world for the last fortnight. I've been
That's just wild. I don't even want to be an Altman world, quite frankly, you know.
I've got bad news for you, Alyssa.
Yeah. Okay.
Bad news. Uh, yeah. So, but I've been listening to them actually, not reading them. You can't get them in the UK, which I just feel fucking outraged about. What the fuck, man?
It is maddening, and it has been maddening for a long time. And I'm trying desperately to figure out a way around this because I do have all of the UK rights. So not that it's a pitch or anything, but I have all the UK rights, and I am trying desperately to get them there because I mean I have a large percentage of readers in the UK, and I'm very, we were actually there this time last year, and didn't want to leave. Susan's waiting for her passport, her UK passport. So because things are so interesting here right now.
Interesting. Let's use that word. Yep, they're
Yes,
interesting. Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
absolute
Yeah,
shit
that's
show. Yeah,
well, I really hope you succeed because they are absolutely the memoirs to read, as I've said in
thank
quite
you.
a few, wherever you are in your memoir writing, and wherever you are in your mother relationship, parental, the whole thing. I mean, so I've been reading them out of order. I started with Motherland, and then I went to Permission, and now I'm on Truth. And actually,
Hmm.
I've just listened to the scene when your mother gets rid of the horse jacket.
Oh God. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. There were no boundaries. Boundaries did not exist. Which I think possibly you can attribute my becoming a writer to that fact, because writing is such a deeply personal, you own it. And I was an only child. And so when I went into my room and I closed the door, and I was writing either, by hand or, eventually by typewriter while living with them, that was mine, and she couldn't throw that out. I mean, she did other things with it years later, where I found um, journals of mine that I inexplicably left in her apartment in a closet, and she needed scratch paper. And so she was taking them out of the closet and just using them to write phone numbers and notes and things like that, which is horrific. But no boundaries, no boundaries. Yeah.
Well, and I was fascinated by your comment that in terms of her reading your work, she was more upset about you writing about the turtle than she was about not knowing she was pregnant for 6 months. So
Yes.
these things are like, you never know, right?
Yeah, and I was actually saying this to a class last night. I'm teaching a class on permission right now, two classes on permission right now, and there's a whole sense of like, well, what can I do to forestall terrible reaction? You don't. Nobody really ever, I don't think, ever sets out to hurt anyone around them. That's not a good reason to write memoir. It's not a good reason to sort of, delve back into one's past and try and make sense of it. Um, but you never know what's going to set someone off, and it's unpredictable. It's a moving target. To your point, I mean, for those of your viewers who haven't read Motherland, we were big animal lovers. We were, we always had dogs, and we had fish, all of whom took their own lives. Uh, you know,
It's such a comedy at its best, isn't it? Really.
they all flung themselves out of their little plastic, their fish tanks. And the same thing was true for our turtle, who got tired of living in his plastic container, his plastic world with his plastic palm tree. But um, my mother did not know that she was pregnant with me for 6 months, which, how does that happen? did. It just did. Completely disconnected from her body for reasons that I can only that I believe are traumatic and in nature and in but um so I established that early on, but when I get to the part about the turtle where the turtle tried to take its own life, like all of the other ones, flung itself out of its dish, its little terrarium. And eventually, we were going out to California and we wound up putting the turtle up for adoption. And my mother and I tell the whole story about, what happened
Yeah.
there. And it's funny and it's sad and it's just it's ridiculous. And that was the thing that my mother was furious about because she didn't want to be considered someone who would harm an animal. But apart from the fact that she was a furrier, which is
Yeah.
insane,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good example of she was a furrier and had been a furrier and a fur model. After she was done with her singing career, she was a furrier for years and loved animals. I mean, we used to say she only came here to visit the dogs,
Yeah.
um, and very very contradictory, complicated human being in the most profound of ways.
Yeah, I mean, that really leaps off the pages. I spent some time listening to her singing on,
Ah,
there's an app on YouTube, which was really great to put that bit around and just be building this
wow.
picture all the time. And, so here are the things that have kind of leapt off the pages to me as I've been listening and listening is, what a battleground I witnessed that it was home, but also intergenerationally, but also
Hmm.
you.
Hmm.
And then also the other thing that really strikes me, and really just because one, I'm just constantly comparing it to my own version of that in my
Yeah.
own life. That there's, that I feel sorrow. I feel the sorrow coming off. I feel the suffering coming off. I feel like that there's some compassion and understanding come off, but what and I feel an enormous amount of love coming off the pages. But what I don't, and I feel fury and anger from the people that you draw. But what I don't hear is your rage, which because I am all rage, So when I
Right.
meet somebody who's writing, and I'm like, wow, okay, so where I'm not quite sure what the question is. Is it where is that, or what have you done with that, or what's your relationship with it, or what's the
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. There's a quote, and I know that I'm going to misattribute it. I think it's Edward Albee, who uh, talked about um, writing rage onto expressing rage on the page, or recording rage you know as readers. We can witness um we can witness the rage of a character, and in memoir, I mean, I refer to myself as a character, I refer to my narrator as a character, and
Mhm.
that's something that I've had to do over the years, to be able to get enough distance from the story to really get my brain around the whole thing rather than just my sort of narrow vision of what happened. Um, but the the rage, I think, has to be there, as part of a world, as part of this universe that I've created, and as opposed to these sort of pockets of, fury, because I think fury is so hard to capture. in
Mm.
narrative. I think it's because one person's fury is not another person's fury. It's why, I was saying this last night. It's why writing about sex is so difficult, and why people, why it's so difficult to do well, because what is what works for one person not going to work for another person, and
Right.
and so that's what makes it so complex. Again, a moving target. So, there's a scene in Motherland where I'm on a tennis court with where I'm not on a tennis court, and I'm in my bedroom, and my mother has decided that she wants to learn how to play tennis. And I was an avid tennis player most of my young life until probably 20 years ago. And, played it, taught it, was a competitive tennis player. And I'm 16 years old, and our body shapes are completely different. My mother is tall and thin and lithe, and I am not in any way, in any, and so this is a body size issue. She had been a model. She did not expect a short, chubby lesbian for daughter, but that's what she got. That's who she got. And she comes into the bedroom, and she asks to borrow a pair of my shorts. And it's a setup. It's obviously a setup, and I say to her, I'm not going to have anything that fits you. It's going to fall down right down to your ankles, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. And she says, if you do not give me your shorts, I'm going to kill myself. And I remember when I got to that place in the manuscript, and I thought, did that one really happen? Am I imagining it? Because I remember the feeling of the fury when that happened. Um, but I had never put that fury into words. It was just not something that I even thought about doing. And I went back to a journal of mine, because I was an avid journal keeper as a kid. And 1979, I'm 16 years old, and there in sort of big felt tip pen is, the tennis story. I will kill myself if you do not. This is what she said. So I rarely talk about corroborating memory via one's journals, but I did at that, and I could see, in the journal, the level of rage, the spluttering ink on the page. And I corroborated it. It did happen. It was not my imagination. It was, the memory was in fact, real, and accurate. But I couldn't I couldn't capture that rage, the spluttering ink, in the Motherland narrative. It had to be there as part of the story. And when the reader reads it, they see, oh my God, this is wild. How do you do that to a teenager, right? How do you do that to a teenager? Um, so long way of answering your question. I think that the key is to capture the feeling. For me, the key is to capture the feeling as opposed to the the rage itself, and the feeling becomes a container for it on the page. And that's what I really tried to do. Um and I'm thinking of other memoirists, people like Mary Karr, um, who are able to really harness that fury. Dorothy Allison, certainly great example, putting that fury down on the page, so the page really explodes. And I think that for me, part of what I was trying to do is trying to create a container for it, because I had to live with it. As a child, as a kid, I had to live with it. And if I didn't create a container for it, I don't know that I'd be sitting here, quite frankly, and I think that that's probably true for a lot of memoirists.
Well, hearing you speak about it explains to me exactly one of the reasons why it's so successful, because I know where the rage is actually, you just told the story and I felt the rage.
Hmm?
You just
Yeah,
told the story. You
right.
didn't tell me how to feel. You just said, this is what happened. And so that for me is such success. Actually, not doesn't have to be memoir. It can be fiction. It can be anything, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sure I've heard you talk about in Permission about don't tell. It's not your job to tell people how to feel. It's your job
Yes,
to tell.
that's
Yeah.
that's exactly right. I mean, I don't ever in my work, I don't want to manipulate the reader into, I talk about, it's the equivalent of, riding a horse, and, you pull the reins this way and the horse goes that way, pull the reins this way and the horse goes that way. And I don't want to do that with my readers. I think probably some people can do that. Some writers can do that and do that well. But for me, um, it would feel inauthentic for me to do that. So.
And it's enough just to tell the story, which you have over 4 memoirs. And if I may also bring up the equivalent comment that your father made around the MFA.
Oh, right, right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So, and that was really, I mean, it was actually even harder to write for me because my father and I were very, very close. We had, for the most part, again, very complicated relationship. Relationships are complicated, they are just, that's just, no relationship is smooth sailing, the whole way. But my father was I can only describe him as a failed poet. He was a wonderful writer. He loved poetry, but couldn't get out of his own way. And also, grew up in the family that was at the core of the Permission story for
Yeah.
me. So that was very, very complicated for him. But when I so he came up to visit me at college, and I said, and the conversation turned to what I was going to do after school, and I wanted to go for an MFA, Master's of Fine Arts, so that I can continue writing and focus on it, and eventually teach at the university level. Because in the States, you have to have a terminal degree in order to teach at the university level. There's just, you can publish 1,000 books. It's some often doesn't really matter. And we went out. We were in Maine. We went out for lunch, and he said, "Well, if you go for your MFA, I'm going to take my own life. I'm going to kill myself." And he was a man of hyperbole, and I don't, but I don't know that he was being hyperbolic, because he also lived with extraordinary depression, and sorrow. He was also a very, very hilariously funny guy. And so he was able to sort of, balance those two things. But when in that scene, as the scene unfolds, he talks about, well, I have life insurance, and then, if I kill myself, you can have the life insurance and then pay for your MFA. And of course, did I go for my MFA? No. Why would I do that? And I'm sorry, my very large 25-pound cat just walked in here. So
Oh, please
if you
invite them in.
if you hear howling, it's only Arthur.
Oh,
Um, Arthur, yeah, he's eating as he always is. But the the idea that he he did not want me to. I don't know that he wanted me to become a writer, and in that way, in that sort of trained academic kind of manner that would then allow me to live and move and exist in a literary community in a different kind of way. I mean, I was always going to be a writer. There's just no question about that. And I think he probably knew that, but I think he wanted limits on it. Um, he had also, in his defense, he had paid for my university, and I went to a private university, and that was extraordinarily expensive in the 1980s, and the early to mid 80s, when the bottom was dropping out everywhere in this country. And he did not want me to get a job while I was studying, because he wanted me to focus on my studies. I did ultimately, work when I was in I think my senior year, my junior year, my senior year. But to say something like that is so utterly undoing on every level. And we were away for a weekend. He had come up to Boston, picked me up. We driven up to Maine, and then we drove back to Boston. And my professors were all sort of, wondering what was next. Was I going to apply to law school? Was I going to apply for my MFA? What? And nothing. And it's only now, all of these years later, almost, 40 some odd years later, I'm still very close to some of my professors that, when I told them this, when they read it, they were just gobsmacked, because they knew him too. And he was loving and supportive and all of those things, but also extraordinarily manipulative. And um, to say something like that to a young person who is just beginning to move forward in their creative work and in their lives, is terrifying and horrifying and stultifying, at the very least. And what he could have said was, I no longer can support your academic work. So that's what grants exist for. That's what scholarships exist for. That's why they're out there. If you are a good writer, you can apply and perhaps get one that will foot the bill for your further studies. But that's not how it was posited to me.
So two questions to that, really. Firstly, was he superficially unconscious of the impact? And secondly, did he not want you to be a writer purely because he worried for your economic safety, or was there more to it? I know you've talked about every family fears a writer in the family. So
Yes. Yeah. I think it was Danny Shapiro who said, nobody ever says, yay, there's a memoirist in the family. Nobody says that.
vouch for
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. We both can. We absolutely both can. And I know you can vouch for that. And it's complicated to have that compulsion that I can't do anything but write about my history and my family and these incredibly interesting people who are all imperfect. God forbid we should be imperfect, right? And I know that you've done the same, and then we have to deal with the consequences on the other end. And that's very complicated. But I think that certainly the part of it for him was the economic consequences of having an artist, a working artist daughter, assuming that I was going to be successful, which is dicey. One never knows. I also think that he was part of a family who I loved very much and who I still love very much, who had very specific ideas about what one should do with one's life. We have a sea of doctors and lawyers in my family, and on both sides, and on my mother's side, we have probably, I think I have 6 cousins across 2 generations, and they're all physicians, and they are all fanatical about healthcare and helping people, um, and it was not their decision to go into medicine was not based on financial, economic possibility. Um, and in the other side of the family, I think that's true also, but I also think that there is a certain stability. They were children of immigrants. That side of the family was like, this is what you're going to do. You're going to be a lawyer. You're going to be a doctor. Or if you're a woman, you're going to be a teacher, because then during the summer when your kids are home from school, you can be around all summer to take care of them, and when you can be home by 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So when they get out, you are home and you can put dinner on the table, and so and so, and so on and so forth. If I had said I would like to get my degree in teaching, my advanced degree in teaching, I don't know that his response would have been the same, because it would have been acceptable it would have been accepted by his family, his sister, brother-in-law, parents. Um, Nobody ever kind of just became an artist. I have a cousin who was actually here this past weekend, who is a brilliant painter. I mean, she's wonderful, trained painter, studied in Italy, just great, and did a lot of commercial art, because that's what she had to do. Um, um, but she is as close as we came to having a full-time working artist in the family. So when I come along, and I think that they didn't know what to make of me. They just didn't know what to make of me.
So generationally, going right back to before your whichever it was your grandparents came to the States, you're the very for whom the stories have bubbled up to the degree where you absolutely have to. Do you think there were those in generations before you for whom it was there, but either economically or just the rules of do not speak were just tighter?
I think that for them the rules were very, very tight. I mean, it was my father's parents both came here in the early 20th century. My grandmother came here in 1901 when she was 2. My grandfather came here in 1905 when he was 11. He came by himself. He wound up, ironically, the editor of a newspaper in New York City, um, and they were all storytellers. And my grandmother was a pianist, and that's a whole other conversation that we can have about abandonment and familial abandonment and what that looks like, and the bravery, the sorrow on the one hand, and the bravery on the other hand, of someone who makes a decision to leave their family, for their art. I'm thinking of Doris Lessing, right? Come right off the top of my head. Um, Very complicated, very, very complex. But I think that there was a lot of creativity there that they didn't feel like it was theirs to pursue. Again, my grandfather was an editor, a newspaper writer, a very funny man, very, very funny storyteller. His mother was lost in the Holocaust. So when he left in 1905 at the age of 11, he probably knew that he was never going to see his family again, but he could never have fathomed in a million years that, what was ultimately what was going to happen. Um, and my grandmother was a concert pianist, and she gave it up. That was her narrative. That was the way she told her stories. As some musicians, I think all musicians are storytellers. Painters are storytellers. The medium is just different. So, I I always wonder what would have happened had she pursued her art. And no one knows because, it's all conjecture. She's been gone since 1990. And even before then, no one ever asked her, why she, and I'm getting ahead of myself here, why she had walked out on the family in 1926. But I have put sort of two and two together, and I've come to the conclusion that it was because of art that she had the chance to be a concert pianist, and she was still very young. She had two children, and she left for that reason. She ultimately came back, and when she came back, there was a piano waiting for her in their apartment at the height of the Depression. So that's the thing that makes me that's the thing that makes me believe that. So, there are a lot of artists, there are a lot of storytellers who didn't do it professionally, um, felt that they couldn't pursue it. My mother is another example of that. Um, and I think, and I believe, and I will go to my grave believing that art unfulfilled results in profound grief and the potential of mental illness and sorrow and all of those things. And that's something that's always sort of kicking. I'm writing a book about grief right now, actually, and that's something that's always in my brain. What do you do if you have five generations in one family of unfulfilled art makers? And how
Right.
does that, you know, how does a family metabolize that? And I think that it's, Rob McFarlane has said, we are the storytelling species. That is what we do. That is who we are. And if we don't do it one way, we'll find another way to do it. But if we're prevented from doing it in the medium in which we want to work, um, I think, I think, problems arise in the most profound of ways.
I mean, that comes screaming off the page, that sense, both with your father's mother and with your mother, that prevention of, rather than abandonment of, but prevention of. But then also there's this running theme, obviously, of abandonment and return. And abandonment and return. And I know your mother was also, if you do X, Y, Z, I'll leave, using that as a threat to your father as a weapon of choice, which
Yes,
just
yes.
runs through. And it fascinates me. And I absolutely stand by the statement that you've just given. Yeah, multiple generations of prevention of an expression of our true selves results in profound grief.
Y-
That's that's my experience as well.
Yeah,
But with
yeah.
you, the lid came off, and you wrote Motherland and Treef and Permission, and it was at the reading of Motherland that the next enormous piece of grief happened.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, Alyssa, I was deeply shocked reading it. On the other hand, I felt profoundly seen. It makes me want to cry because that is what happened to me. So thank you for writing it. Can you talk? Would you be okay to talk some more about that? If people listening don't know what happened, perhaps you can say a little bit about what
Yes.
happened.
Yes. So, my mother, as I've said, my mother was a very complicated woman. She was a beautiful, model, singer on television, singer on radio, and grew up in an abusive home, and sort of funneled all of that beauty and music and talent into a way to leave her abusive home, but um it didn't heal any of the profound sorrow that she carried with her. And I'm not, I'm not by in any way saying that that people who live with grief inevitably wind up with these particular conditions. But she was bipolar. She had borderline personality disorder, and that manifested as narcissistic personality disorder, which is a subcategory, sort of an unofficial subcategory in the DSM, which is the diagnostic manual that is on every physician's desk.
That crazy manual that is,
Yeah, like gigantic, right, like War and Peace, right? And literally like War and Peace. And and we never, there was a moment in time, I think, when I was 11, and I learned how to say no to her, that turned our lives upside down. And she had a terrible marriage to my father, and a not great marriage to my stepfather, who was a wonderful, wonderful man. I was very lucky to have him in my life. He was a very loving and kind, and generous, emotionally generous person. But the story was that over a period of years, I I don't want to say that I was physically estranged from her, because I continued to see her. I'm an only child, and I felt profoundly responsible for her, knowing her illnesses, her various illnesses, and I felt about her the way you would feel about a child running into oncoming traffic. You know, keep them safe, keep them fed. And that's what I did with her, was I tried to keep her from harming herself and everyone else, as best I could. And at the same time, I was emotionally estranged from her, because she was like Pac-Man. I mean, she gobbled up everything in her path. This is what people with narcissistic personality disorder do. Look at the White House right now.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
he is a classic MPD. And when everybody says, "Can you believe what he did?" My response is, "Of course I can believe what he did." It's textbook.
Stop
Um,
being
right. So I learned how to keep myself as physically safe from her, and emotionally safe from her, as I possibly could. And I fell in love, and I met the woman who would become my wife, and I left New York City and moved to Connecticut, to a rural area of 3,500 people, from down to, from Midtown Manhattan to this tiny little town, and began my life separate from hers, and sort of unknotted that enmeshment that had really just tangled my life and tangled our lives for years. And I was on my book tour for my second book, and I came home one night, and the phone rang, and she said the two words that every um, you know adult child of an elderly parent will hear at some point: "I fell." And at that point, I knew that I had to step back into our lives together, and I had to make sure that her health care was what it needed to be. And I had to do all of this practical stuff, because in the stepping back from her, over the years, she had completely mucked up her insurance. We don't have anything like the NHS here, so our insurance is private insurance, for the most part, until you hit a certain age, and even then, some of it is private. And she mucked that up because she didn't want to carry an insurance card that had her birth date on it, because if she handed her card to a physician, or God forbid, an ambulance driver, and they said, "Oh, you're over 65. She didn't want them to know she was a senior citizen, right? So she would rather have had terrible insurance that I ultimately wound up having to sort of foot the bill for, to sort of shore it up, than have people know the truth about her age, which is remarkable, but classic NPD. Yeah, classic NPD, completely, disinclined to think about the upshot of that. How that going to affect her financially and physically and all of those things. And so as the story unfolds, it travels back and forth in time, from, the then present of, the injury and the care and the surgeries and my having to really expose myself to, my heart and my spirit to her, um, as Pac-Man, and put myself at risk, and I had to make that choice between, excuse me, do I walk away or do I help her? And I chose to help her. Um, and together it was like watching a ping pong match. I mean, it was back and forth and back and forth, and realizing as I wrote it, how, excuse me, how desperately, emotionally abusive she had been, to me. And it's hard for me to say that because she's passed, she just passed in October, I've had various, health issues myself over the last year. And so I'm just coming into this place of grief, um, that had to be almost postponed while I tried to care for my own, and my wife tried to help me care for my own medical issues. But I wrote Motherland in real time while it was unfolding, which is not
Wow.
advisable, you know. Um,
I didn't know that. That's a really fascinating
yeah. Yeah, yeah. So I had signed my book contract, and I was working on the book for 6 months. It was meant to be something else. And it was 6 months into it when I got the phone call, and my editor, who lives in a couple of towns away, came over in a driving snowstorm and said, "So I guess it's gonna be a different book now." And that's what happened. What I tried very hard to do, and forgive me if I'm speaking in circles, but what I tried very hard to do was I tried to, um, show both of us at our best and our worst. And, I'm reminded of that Vivian Gornick quote: "For the drama to deepen, we need to see the loneliness of the monster and the cunning of the innocent." And, and that was very important to me. I had that tacked, onto a cork board above my desk, and as I was writing. And I always asked myself, am I being fair? Am I being accurate? Um, am I manipulating the reader, pulling them this way or pulling them that way? And it was really important to me that I didn't do that, and that the story be told in as fair a way as I could possibly, manage it. And, I won't give anything away, but there's really almost no resolution at the end of it. You just sort of see, the two characters kind of literally like walking off into the sunset together. One of them now has a cane. And, um, yeah, it was the most complicated book I think I've ever written thus far. Um, and I'm glad that I wrote it. I'm glad that, it unraveled so much for me and really, held a very, held a close lens over our relationship that I had normalized for all of these years. I mean, I was, 50, I want to say, when I started writing it. I had normalized it, and people who grow up in an abusive situations, um, very often, if they don't flee, they will normalize it because it's the only way to get through one's day, and to get through one's life. Then they may flee after that. But I had normalized it in a way that is still shocking to me.
Yeah. I mean, I want to say how impressed I was with the amount of love that I experienced from you in the telling. I mean, I was really like, in a way, I was as shocked by that as I was by the empirical facts that were being reported and the beautiful circular motion of you don't know what I gave up for you, which I love the return. There's a return to that phrase again and again and again throughout, and
Yeah,
it's very beautiful. And it's never, in some ways as well, it's never answered, although we know, but we don't. There's a mistiness to it, as well as an absolute clear focus to it. But yeah, I was just so staggered by the amount of love. Again, when I compare it, that is not how I feel. So
yeah,
I
yeah,
was
yeah,
really impressed. I have to say, I was really impressed by that. I was impressed by
yeah.
it.
Thank you. I mean, you know, I think that all of us who live with abusive or have lived in traumatic situations, having to do with our families of origin, and we remove ourselves. Um, we, you know, we either we either remove ourselves physically and emotionally, um, or some version of that. And I have been accused of Stockholm syndrome, and people who read it and say, "How can you feel this way? Where is this love coming from?" Um, and I've had to spend a lot of time thinking about that, and I still think about that, all the time, and I'm now faced with the reality of having to go through massive bags of papers of hers, that I never expected to find. I mean, I'm finding letters involving attorneys, and I have written about this on Substack, so I'm comfortable talking about it. But um, the discovery that she in 1999 or early 2000 had taken my name off the apartment that I lived in and that we co-owned, that we were co-deed owners together. And either because she was so enraged that I was leaving her for another woman, or just leaving her, period, um, or she thought that my new girlfriend at that time was a gold digger of some sort. I don't know. I mean, my Buddhist Quaker girl, you know, as they inevitably tend to be, right?
Yeah,
Um,
obviously.
yeah, and I didn't know that. I didn't, and in order to do something like that, to change names on the deed, you have to have one party sign it, and it has to be notarized legally. And we discovered that she forged my signature um, in order to do that. And I never knew that. Susan, the letter was dated November of 2000. So it was a month after I introduced her to Susan, and a month before I left New York permanently and moved to Connecticut. Um, and I was stunned. I mean, this is just about a month or so ago, and I was reeling. And when you find that kind of thing, um, after having a relationship like the one I had with my mother, one walks around and starts to think, oh my God, this was really true. This was
Mm,
that was who she was. You
yeah.
know, you tried to find the good in her and the
Mm,
good in your collective story. And as a child of someone who lived with traumatic experience, um, you know that she did too. And so you try and um, cut her slack. I don't know if that's the right, but
it-
you try to, apply that to her. And I think that was the way I was able to write about her with love, because I recognized her as an enormously damaged person, and
right.
but she removed my name from ownership of my apartment. And had I moved back to New York for any reason, my apartment would have been gone. My flat would have been gone, that I co-owned. Um, so it's been very hard in light of what I wrote in Motherland, um, and the whole conversation about Stockholm syndrome, which is a viable conversation to have vis-a-vis motherland, and what anyone who has an experience like what I had, what you had. um Stockholm syndrome is an important discussion to have, always, I think. um but if I hadn't found that letter, I don't know that the synapses would have connected to the degree that they have just in the last few months. And so now I'm thinking, God, do I need to write a volume two? When does this stop? Do I need to write a post note to the afterword? I don't know. I don't know, but it is shocking. It is truly shocking.
I mean, these are stories of the survivor, and I know as one that the
Hmm.
default of a survivor always go back to Storyland, and then
Hmm.
something happens. Information exactly like the forged signature. Or I had something happen recently, and I had exactly that. Oh God, no, it was true. And these are reality checks that
Hmm.
are useful. And trying to hold all of those conflicting things. A damaged person. I love this person. They did not want the best for me. All of these things in one hand is what's called being an adult.
Yes, yes, and it's
Like
and it's
probably,
it's confusing and conflicting, and it
yeah,
makes no sense, and it is never linear. It is never, ever linear. The only part of it I think that's linear is early on, when you're too young to really get your brain around the enormity of the situation, because it's too dangerous. You want to see. I don't remember who I was just listening to someone, maybe Gabor Mate, talking about the reason why young children um, take trauma onto themselves. They find they will blame themselves for their parents' terrible behavior and abusive behavior, because it's impossible for a 5-year-old child to think of their parent as a monster. It's
right,
impossible, because that's the person who's supposed to be protecting them.
ex-
So
exactly.
yeah.
An hour has almost gone by, Alyssa, but I can't leave. I can't leave without, and thank you for sharing all of that, but I can't leave without just moving into permission just a little bit. Really, again, just for the sake of all the memoirists who I know have joined us and who will watch it in record, about the fallout. Now, the scene that really, again, resonated so strong was when the relation of yours had you up against the wall, and that was the
Mhm.
moment of banishment. Could you just maybe, and I know you do the class on this a lot, but
Yeah,
to
yeah,
talk to, you write a memoir, Expect the Fallout. Can you talk to that a little bit in terms of how people prepare for that, or know it's coming, or how that affects their writing, and what happened to
yeah.
you?
Yeah. So the very short version, because of time, the very short version is um, in my very first memoir that came out in 2013 was Poor Man's Feast. A linear memoir, a linear story. I leave New York. I fall in love with somebody who comes from a completely different background than I do, and a completely different, world sensibility than I was raised with in New York, and I am a food writer at that time, and primarily a food writer at that time, and everything happens at the table. I mean, we started this conversation by talking about your aga, right?
Yeah.
So I can't, I can't get away from that, right?
Yeah.
And that's at core, that's who I am. And I grew up in a home where my mother was a terrible cook. I mean, she was just an awful, like deadly cook, really, really bad. But I
Ditto.
became a food writer, and it was like, where did this come from? Where did this need to sustain and nurture? It came from my father, who was a very good cook. Where did that come from for him? And it came from his need to nurture and sustain himself as a child, because when he was 3 years old and my aunt was 8 years old, my grandmother, it was 1926, my grandmother walked out on them. And she came back eventually, but she walked out on them. The book comes out, and a year later, I no longer have that side of my family. Essentially, I have been excised from that side of the family, because although all parties were long gone, my father talked about the abandonment all the time. I mean, I grew up with that story hanging like a cloud, that mothers can leave, mothers do leave, and that, of course, is connected directly to motherland as well. But the possibility that mothers do leave. Terrible abandonment complex as a child. My wife would probably say she still has it. Which it is what it is. And so I grew up with it, but what I did not know was that my aunt, my father's sister, never told her adult children. So the book comes out. I was in my mid 40s, I want to say, mid-ish 40s, and my cousins were in their 60s, older 60s, younger 60s, and they didn't know that our grandmother had walked out on their mother, and that their mother at 8 years old spent time in an orphanage. And the part of the problem was the fact that it was a secret on their side, that side of, in their home, it was a secret. In my home, it was not a secret. And so the question becomes, when is a secret not a secret? And how responsible are we as writers for the stories that we tell, that we must tell, that may ruffle the feathers of the people around us? Now, what happened to me is extreme. It was an extreme case. It was terrible, and it took me 10 years to get to a place where I was able to talk about it, write about it. It was actually 3 years. I wrote an essay about it for Krista Tippett's blog. And I sort of sent it off to them, and I thought, they're never going to publish it. I mean, I don't have to worry about anything. And I was actually at a wedding, and my phone went off, and it was her editor saying, we're hitting the publish button like tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I thought,
Yeah.
oh crap, what am I going to do? This is a nightmare. Yeah. And are they going to see it? And, is the
Yeah.
family that disowned me going to see it? And then I thought, you can't be disowned twice. That's the thing about
Right.
being disowned, right? There's that. But
Yeah.
if you had told me, 20 years ago, that I would lose these people to whom they were like siblings to me, and we were very, very close. We traveled together. We celebrated all of our holidays and birthdays, we were very, very close. If you had told me that that was going to happen to me because of 8 lines at the end of um, my first memoir that explains everything, I would have said that there's no way that there's no way. Um, and so, what I was actually talking about in class last night is that it's a moving target. We never know. And the act of writing is a risky business, whether it is fiction or memoir, creative nonfiction, essay, poetry, it doesn't matter. It is a risky business. Writers are brave people we have to be. And if you think that, well, I'll do this and nobody will know they won't recognize themselves, wrong. Um, I have had, I wish it were otherwise, but it's not. I've had people be really angry at me because I wrote that, Aunt so and so's chicken was delicious, but not fabulous. It wasn't fabulous. It was delicious. So really angry with me. Um, and you have to be okay with that, and not okay with it, but you have to understand that when someone responds in a way that is so extreme and so unexpected, that it is entirely about them, and it is rarely about what you have written, or what you've said, or the secrets that you've revealed. I mean, for me, it was a perfectionism issue. That side of my family is invested in being perfect and having this perfect persona. I think that comes largely from the fact that they were second generation immigrants, and directly connected to these people who left a very poor and dangerous life in another country, and wanted to be completely assimilated and completely accepted as perfect American people. And in perfect families, mothers don't leave. Well, guess what? There is no such thing as a perfect family. It doesn't exist. The other side of it is that as a memoirist, what it bore was that it bore more story, right? So the question for me was, why did she leave? All of those years, all of it, no one, they were already, they were happy to make her a pariah. It was easy to make her a pariah, to attack her, to attack her ethically and morally and all of those things. But nobody asked why she left. Was it spousal abuse? Was it because she fell in love with somebody else? Was it because of art? Wait, I think it was because of art. So when you're writing memoir, the top layer of, oh my God, if I write this thing, um, am I going to be excised? Or is someone going to have a terrible response to it? Am I going to hurt someone? Am I obligated to show them the manuscript before it comes out? The river parts with that question. I am a big believer in not showing a manuscript to people who were in it until much later in the process, or unless you need to corroborate something, you need to get information. You need to make sure that something's accurate. Um, but what you will come away with is um, the fact that it's complicated. Reactions will be complicated. Reactions will be unpredictable. There may be no reaction where you would assume that there would be a reaction. That happens too. And you will also come away learning far more than you probably ever would have imagined at the outset. And that, I think, is the value of memoir for us as writers of it, but also, we learn so much about human nature when we write memoir, and when we write it authentically and as purely and honestly as we can.
Yeah. And I think that's why, again, I'll say again that anyone who's engaged in memoir really, I'm going to use the should word, should read Permission, because you lay out the very complex matters around it. Where there are some areas where the rules don't apply, or they do apply, or that, you know what I mean? Right from the beginning, all those things that your students bring you. The example of the woman who had drawings or photographs of her naked children, and had they
Yes. Sally
complex.
Mann. Right.
Exactly. So it really stands as the most useful resource, as well as a story, a beautifully written personal
Thank you.
story.
Thank you.
Yeah, really. I know what it reflected for me was my debut, obviously, which was fiction, but I used all
Right.
real names. But my experience of that was I went into it completely innocently. I didn't know it was a secret that wasn't a secret. And it
Right.
wasn't a secret.
Right.
I had no idea. And the manuscript was only shown, like, we were just, I think we'd already pressed play on publish. We were ready to go. And I was just like, oh, sure, you can read it.
Yeah.
And my God. But
Yeah.
what it did, what it gave me was the opportunity to say, do I want to belong in this prison, or do I want out? Because it was my key out.
Right.
And it gave me that. And, we can all know what I chose.
Right.
And
And it's really important. I mean, this is about bravery, and it's about rule breaking, and the jail created by by sort of the party line, and knowing the people in our midst, in the way they truly would have wanted to have been known, as opposed to, almost being formed and shaped by other people who want perfection, who are looking for perfection, and
right.
to fit a uniform, to fit a uniform. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it is very, very complicated. It's very complicated.
And interesting as well, that line about it revealed the profoundly humanness of our ancestors. Mine, so it's exactly the same as yours, but mine
Hmm.
were the untouchable aristocrats.
Hmm.
So what a beautiful mirror going on there. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's
At
human
least,
nature, right? It's just human
right.
nature.
Yeah, it's human nature. And I think the not knowing, for me as well, it was a story our father told at the table a million times, just like yours.
Hmm.
I didn't know that everybody would freak out. But the other thing that my therapist pointed out to me was like, well, maybe what's been revealed is, if she can talk about this, what else is she going to talk about?
Right, right, right,
Like, oh, that explains the level of fury that came at me, that I was just like, everybody knows this story. I don't understand why you're getting so cross. And I was like,
right,
oh, right, there's a writer in the family and she says things. Oh shit.
right.
Was that?
And it becomes a control issue. It
Yeah.
becomes a control issue. It is human nature. I believe it is human nature to want to control the way the world sees us. And when a writer sits down, whether you are writing a fictionalized version of a family story, or you're writing it as memoir, um, the people in it who are alive or dead, it doesn't. They want to be able to control it's spin. I mean, that's what they call it in Hollywood. It's spin.
Yep.
They want to be able to control the spin. And here you come, and here I come, not even wanting to, but needing to be the truth teller. And in
Right.
every family, there is a truth teller. And that is just the way it is. It's the luck of the draw. I mean, and it's the luck of the draw that it's us,
I, I think so. I think it's the luck of the draw.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think to listen and sit at the table of those like you, who have been already walked a long way down that road, is a very useful thing to do, because it just gives you signposts around, in a sense, what's normal and what to expect and what to look for. And these things are useful, I think, for all of those. When we begin on a road, it's useful to turn to those who are further down the road and say, okay, tell me about yours, which is
Oh, thank
exactly what
you.
I've done with and Motherland
Thank you.
and Tree. Yeah, and
Thank
Poor
you.
Man's Feast. So, Elisa, I'm going to let you go. It's been the most amazing hour. 15 minutes.
Let's go out for tea. Can you? I'll be.
Oh, yeah, totally go out for tea.
It was a wonderful conversation. I'm so grateful to you and to everybody who signed on to join in.
Great.
So thank you.
Thanks everybody. Really fantastic. Poor Man's Feast is Elisa Altman's Substack. You can also find all her books on elisaaltman.com website. Elisa, I can't wait to meet you in person and
I look forward to it.
It's gonna happen. Okay.
Good.
Loads of love.
All right. Thank you.
Have a great.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.